Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Jiggy on 3-bet pots. Yay! A lot of you guys have been asking me to make a video on 3-bet pots, so there it is. This is 4 hands in a replayer. First one is a made-up hand. Other 3 are hands that were actually played by Blue Fire members who sent me their hand stories by mail. I want to thank every one of them who sent me hand stories. And in these ends, in separate ends, we will be looking at like different variables that you want to be looking at and you want to be taking in consideration while playing a 3-bet pot, at how these variables are gonna affect your play. So enjoy. Okay, let's go. First in here, what we are gonna be looking at is your opponent. How changing type of opponent is gonna change your play post flop in a 3-bet pot, and that's something that's like the first thing you have to look at when you're playing 3-bet pot. Of course, like in any other pot, I think you have to play the player, but a lot of people actually at smalls and mid stakes kind of misunderstand and misapply this concept, and they just go with pretty much the strength of their hand, especially in 3-bet pots. I think they just look at their hand, look at the board, and think, oh, I have one pair, I can call one street and fold the turn, or I have set or full house, I'm gonna slow play, or they just don't take into consideration every other more important aspect in the end. And the first one here is the player you're playing against. So here we're gonna be playing against a predictable guy. We don't have stats on him, but I guess we can assume he's predictable. He's the type of guy that you're gonna be seeing a lot at mid and small stakes, kind of multi-tabling nit, who's playing like 10 tables and not paying attention and just playing their system and etc. etc. So let's see how here we're gonna play our hand against that type of guy. That is actually a very standard and generic spot, and I made up the end because I just didn't want to go through in the story to find that kind of hand. But it's the only made up end of the video, and I just made it up because, well, anyway, you're gonna see that kind of hand like 10 times a session, guy. If you play long sessions, it's gonna be more. But anyway, you raise to 14 on the cutoff with pocket 8, because pocket 8 is cool, and you get 3-bet. You're 130 big blinds deep. We know that his 3-betting range is pretty strong. He's 3-betting like he's playing pretty straightforward, so he's 3-betting 10s and up, ace king, ace queen, king queen most likely, and sometimes he's throwing some weird ends in the mix, because nowadays even nits understand the concept of deception and stuff like that. But most of the time he's just gonna be playing pretty straightforward, and he's gonna have strong end pre-flop, and he's gonna play post-flop according to the strength of his hand, and that is gonna be very easy for you guys to make plays or stuff like that post-flop. So we end up taking the flop, of course, because like I said, pocket 8 is cool. And he bets into us 64 into 104 on the flop, jack 9-5 with a flush draw, which is obviously a pretty wet board and an interesting board as well. First of all, here we know that that kind of guy is the type of guy who we already have it read on him, let's say, and he's the type of guy like a lot of, like I said, multi-tabling nits, who's gonna take like one stab when they're the original re-raiser. They tend to take a stab at the pot, and Like no matter what they have, no matter what the board is, they just continuation bet when they are the three better. Because a lot of these guys do that. They just play it like that. And on later streak, you don't expect him to be multi-barreling a lot or multi-barrel. Do I have to say multi-barreling, anyways, whatever. Multi-barreling a lot. So you know that his first barrel here on the flop doesn't mean much about his hand. He pretty much has the same range as pre-flop. I think the only kind of hand we can rule out here is like a weak made hand, but he's not having that a lot pre-flop. Something like 9-8 or 9-10 or stuff like that is most likely to check the flop, but he's not gonna have that a lot from his pre-flop action anyways. So yeah, when he c-bets, like I said, he still has overpairs and overcards, and that's pretty much it. He has from 10s and up, maybe 9s to maybe like a couple of sets there that he could have hit, and he's gonna have like ace king, ace queen, and king queen big percentage of time, because that's a big part of his range, and we know like not 100% of the time, but like maybe 80-90% of the time he's gonna take a stab at the flop. One other very important thing here is the board texture. Like I said, it's pretty wet, and it's gonna give us a lot of options. Against a predictable guy, that plays in our favor actually. That a lot of cards on the turn and river are gonna be scared cards. And against the type of guy who we do not expect to be bluffing or like multi-barreling draws, or we just do not expect to have him to have that many draws in his range right now. Like I said, scare cards are gonna play in our favor, because we could take him off a pretty strong hand a lot of time when, let's say, a flush card hits, or a 10 or 8, or well, not an 8 because we have set, or a 7, or even maybe queen hit, some straight card hit. Like I said, it's gonna play in our favor because we will have the opportunity to make him fold better hand. So post flop, after the flop, he is most likely to just tell us what his hand is on the turn. If he checks the turn, he's most likely to have nothing. We know that on such a wet board, he's gonna bet for protection, all his overpairs on the turn, like second barreling, close 100% of the time. He's not gonna play that too tricky. And like I said, he's not the type of guy who's gonna be pushing like a weak draw, something like king queen too far. Like he's not gonna 2 and 3 barrel that. And if he bets again, but that turn is a pretty big scare card, we could bluff him out of an overpair sometimes as well. So I think that's a pretty good spot given the board and given the opponent to call the flop. So we call the flop, obviously, and the turn is an offsuit 4, which is a total brick. Here on such a brick, if he bets again, we can just fold, because we know he doesn't have that many draws in his range, and he's not likely to second barrel total air like ace king. So when he bets again, it's just fold. He's gonna have overpair way too often. But when he checks, he's most likely to be very weak. We are most likely to have the best hand here. There could be an argument for betting, saying like you have to protect your hand, yada yada. But I think sometimes he's gonna go for a like check raise on the turn, maybe with something like tens who's putting us on a draw, or something like draw himself, and we're not really happy about bet calling that turn. So I think checking it back and trying to go to showdown is by far our best option here. So we check it back. River is 7, which is like almost the ultimate scare card, but once again, there could be some arguments for betting, saying that we make him fold like 95% of his range, but I think we're good way too often here, and if he does happen to have a hand like 10s or something like that, or jack 10 sometimes, he could be likely to be like hero calling us here, thinking that we could have like missed king queen on the flop or queen 10 or something like that. But I just think we're good often enough here, and he could have a flush sometimes as well. He's the type of guy who's gonna like check flush draw on the turn, hoping to either get a free card or check raise us all in, more than like turn like putting himself into barreling mode. He's gonna check the turn a lot more often with a flush draw. Could have a flush on the river, and anyway, we just check it down. And he has ace king miss because I made up the end and we win. Wee! So I think that's the right way to approach that type of spot against a predictable guy. We are now be looking at pretty much the same end, but against another type of player, and we'll see how this affects how we're gonna play our hand. So now hand number 1.2, let's say. Pretty much the same hand, but we're gonna be playing against good tricky bastard here. If you want to put a name on the good tricky bastard, you can call him DrGiggy or whatever. So that guy is gonna play a lot different than the predictable guy, and it's gonna affect our own play, especially on the flop here. So, and we'll see how that will affect our play. So yes, we are still raise 8, and we still get 3-bet by the good tricky bastard, who's just a bit deeper, like 50 bucks deeper than in the first example, just for the sake of my own argumentation. But anyways, we still take the flop in position. We're pretty deep. What we know about good tricky bastard is that he's gonna have a lot more tricky hands into his 3-betting range. He's gonna be 3-betting a lot more like suited connectors from the blind, especially like more than 100 big blinds deep. He could be 3-betting small pockets as well. He's gonna be 3-betting his big pockets as well, but he'll throw in some tricky hands like queen 10 suit or 5-6 suited or stuff like that in the mix as well. A lot more than the predictable guy, but we can still take flop with pocket 8 in position because it's a cool hand, and we have position. And the flop is still the same, jack 9 5 suited, and we still get bet 64 into us. Now the problem about this wet board against such a tricky and a good opponent is that all the scare cards that are gonna fall on the turn and river are gonna play against us instead of playing for us, because he's gonna use them a lot to try and barrel us out of our weak made ends, stuff like pocket 8 that we have here. And even if turn and river breaks off, he's the type of guy who's gonna be pushing a lot with like any draw. He's gonna take like king queen here and go for barrel, flop, turn, and pretty much river as well, hoping to either hit his end or make you fold something like, I don't know, jack 10 or pocket 10, or for instance pocket 8 here. He's gonna be 3-barreling you a lot. Like if it's a break, he's gonna try to represent an overpair, and if it's like flush card, a straight card, he's gonna try to represent flush or straight. So you're gonna get a lot less checks on the turn here with your hand that kind of want to get to showdown. So that leaves us with a lot less options. I think calling the flop here is way more marginal than against the predictable guy. Even though we might be folding here the best end a bit more often than against the predictable guy, who's going to have overpairs a lot more, I think that he's going to put us in such a bad spot on the turn and the river so often that against a good player here, I don't think it's pretty profitable to like have a plan of just calling one street, because when you call first street on such a wet board, he's gonna go ahead and think, okay, he's not likely to have like a set or something that strong, because on such a wet board you would often raise it and try to make it look like he has a draw. So you're gonna get barreled a lot, and he's gonna try to make you fold a lot of these ends. And if the flush or straight card hit, we can no longer use them as much as against a predictable opponent, because the good tricky bastard could have these type of hands a lot more than the other one. So we're gonna have a lot less options on both turn and river, and we are gonna get moved off our end so often, and he is gonna have overpairs too quite a bit. And like if he bets the turn again with these stack size, I don't think shove is really profitable, because when you, let's say the turn's again a 4 and he bets again, and we know he's like 2-barreling all of his draws, I don't think you can shove profitably, because when you are behind, you are way behind, you only have 2 outs, and when you're ahead, you're just slightly ahead, as he could still hit is like not flush draw or pair plus flush draw or anything like that. So yeah, like I said, given the fact that you're gonna get barreled a lot more on later streets, I think it's much more reasonable on that type of board against that type of opponent to just go ahead and fold the flop, saving yourself tough decisions on later streets, tough decisions that you would not have against the predictable guy. So here, like I said, that was the first example, just changing who you're playing against. You saw that it's exactly the same hand than in the first one, but just changing your opponent is going to change a lot the way you think about the end, and playing against a better opponent is going to cut a lot into your options. And I think here your most profitable play is going to be the fold, because it's going to make you make a lot more mistakes on later streets if you end up calling that flop, and it's going to suck a lot. I would much rather call that flop, for instance, with like a 5-6 or something like that, just because if you're behind, you have more outs, and you're not getting showdown that often anyway. So with pocket 8, with just 2 outs if you're behind, and without much options, even if scare card hits, I think the fold is the better play. So we go ahead and fold. And he probably had aces anyway, because I made up the end. So yep, that was the first example of how changing the opponent is going to change your own play in a 3-bet pot. So hand number 2, we'll be playing as Joe Guns. That's not the player's actual real name. He wanted me to change his screen name, but he's gonna recognize himself anyway. So thanks, dude, for the hand you sent me. I picked that hand because for a couple of reasons that you will see later, actually, but mainly because I want to be looking at how what you are representing is gonna affect your play in a poker hand. I went over that subject a lot in my latest video, which was called DrGiggy Represents, but I didn't have the chance to look at any 3-bet pot, so I decided to put in here a 3-bet pot that was sent to me by my friend Joe Guns here, and yeah, analyze that. So first one, we looked at our opponent. Now we're going to look at what you are representing yourself. Here about the reads on the players during the hand. My friend sent me here the reads he had. Simi was actually pretty much the fish in the game. He was just playing loose and badly and retardedly. And Mark Lar here is like of a nit tag fish who's playing something like 18-12 if I remember well, and just not that good overall. So that's it. We get kings on the button. The fish opens in the cutoff. We are obviously 3-betting. He made it a bit large. I don't know if he always makes it that big in position. I'm gonna assume that he made it that big because of the fish and that he wanted to build a pot, because normally I would much rather advocate like a 3 times raise in position, 3 times re-raise in position, much more than like 4 times or 3.8 or stuff like that, because well, it's just better. but like I said, I'm gonna assume that he made it larger to build the pot against the fish, which is actually the right thing to do. So yeah, flop 10-9-5. We get two calls. We get cold call from Marklar and call from Simi. We're gonna look at our opponent's range right now. Here, Marklar, I think we can kind of assume that he has stuff like a mill pair close to 100% of the time. I don't see any other end that like a tag knit fish, like tag knit, is gonna call cold call a 3-bet with from the blinds, even 200 big blinds deep. I think he's just folding ace queen. He's probably 4-betting ace king because he doesn't want to play it out of position. Is most likely holding is like pocket 9, 10, jack, queen, less kings because we could have it, and aces as well because since Simi is in the end, he would probably try to not scare Simi out of the end and just cold call aces here and hope to get a call from the fish as well and try to get value out of said fish later in the end. So yeah, we're gonna assume here that Marklar, and I think you guys will agree, has like middle pair almost every time here. And Simi is just as close to 22 cards. I mean, he's going to have like the exact same range than for his cutoff open. I think with a fish with like a 3-way pot that deep is going to be curious to see the flop with pretty much any gapper or any two suited or whatever. So he's gonna have a lot of things. He could have flop like middle pair, bottom pair, top pair here, much more than Marklar could have. So yeah, we have kings here, and we want to bet because we want to get value out of Simi, who's like our target in that end, and he's gonna be last to act, so he's much more likely to put money in after we bet. Much more than Marklar, who's kind of in the squeeze spot, and he's gonna be a lot more cautious about his hand. And when we bet here, one thing we want to make sure we understand is that our hand for any end reader looks very strong. We 3-bet pre-flop, and now we bet into this like semi-wet board with straight draws and stuff like that against two guys with pretty strong range, like one with a strong range and the other one that we don't expect him to fold like any piece of the flop, even a gutter and stuff like that. He's gonna at least peel one street. So Marklar has to know here that we are pretty strong and that our bet is much more likely to be a value bet than a bluff. That being said, I don't think he's folding right away like jacks or queens on the flop, but we have to make sure we understand that we look very strong here by betting. Joe Gans ended up betting 101. I would have probably bet a little smaller just to make it more suspicious for Simi. Like betting 80 like half pot is gonna look, like I said, so suspicious to Simi. And we're not folding at any point against the fish anyway in that end, so he might check raise us a lot lighter here if we bet less than more. If we bet more, he's gonna assume that we have a big hand most of the time, and he's gonna be a lot more cautious than if we bet like half pot or third of the pot or something tricky like that, which I would probably gun with. But anyway, we ended up betting 101, which is not a mistake at all anyways. And we get check raised by Marklar here, which is not really something we expected, and certainly not what we wanted to happen. So yeah, it's bad news, but we can still work our way out of that if we think correctly. So the most important point in this end is like in comparison from the first end, which like the most important thing in the first end was our opponent. Here is, I think, it is way more important to understand correctly what we are representing and to know that we just by our flop bet are representing a pretty strong hand. So the check raise here is much more likely to be for value than as a bluff or semi-bluff or stuff like that. There could be an argument made for folding right away because he's such a nit and stuff, but I think a call is a bit better here. Actually, we're getting a pretty good price on our call, and we could still be good a certain amount of the time because they are still jacks and queens in Marklar's range here. That given how the dynamic of that multi-way pot, it could be like turning his end into like trying to get information against us instead of like check calling flop and turn it with queens. He could decide, okay, I'm gonna check raise flop and see where I'm at against Joe Guns and try to get value out of Simi because we pretty much know that Simi is not gonna fold like a top pair pretty much ever here, no matter what the action. So yeah, he could still have jacks or queens. He can still have 9, 10s and aces a lot with that check raise, but we're getting a pretty good price on our call on the turn. Most important thing here is not only the price we're getting on our call, but also the fact that in my mind there's like exactly a 0% chance that if we call the turn, we are gonna get moved out of the best end on further streets. If, like I said, if he has something like jacks or queens, there's like no way in the world with that action that he's like gonna shove the turn for value because he knows he's not gonna get called by worse here if he's shoving with queens or jacks on the turn. And if he has like some random bluff with ace queen, which I don't expect him to have, but maybe he has that like 1% of the time, there's no way that he's gonna try to bluff us out of our hand because we would play a big hand here exactly like that, like every time, like aces and kings and 9s and 10s are in 9, 10 or 5 maybe even sometimes we're gonna play it like that, like always. And when we do call the check raise on the flop, we look so strong that, like I said, there's absolutely 0% chance that we are gonna get moved out of the best end on further streets. In the previous hand, the pocket 8 and against the good tricky bastard, that was one of our concerns, to get moved out on later streets out of the best end, and that ended up being an argument for folding right away because it's gonna be tough to know where you're at on first streets. But here, with our range being so strong, it's gonna be so easy to know where we are at. Like if he bets the turn, we are insta folding, and if he starts checking turn, I think we can just try to check it down and get to showdown because we don't really have any value, I think, by betting further in that hand. So yeah, like I said, the fact that we look so strong here is gonna gives us the option to try to get to showdown very, very easily, and gives us the opportunity to be absolutely sure to never get bluffed out of our hand. And in that kind of spot, it's really important to know that we are representing such a strong range, because by knowing that, you know that first, you're never going to get bluffed, like pretty much never ever, so you can fold the bottom of your like quote unquote value betting range and just get it in with the top of your range anyways. But like I said, it's gonna allow you like almost over repping your hand is gonna allow you to be sure of where you're at on later streets, and it's gonna be very easy to play, especially in position. If like I gave the example of the pocket 8 in that kind of spot where we are not gonna know where we're at. If the guy bets it again on the turn, it's gonna be a lot more tougher, and that the kind of spot that you almost want to get rid of your end right away because you're gonna be lost on further streets. But like I said here, the important thing is that our range is very, very strong, especially again after calling check raise. That is not a concern. Like, the end's gonna be played very straightforwardly because of our own range and what we are representing. So obviously the good play here is to call flop and fold on further action and try to get the showdown. But our friend Joe Gans totally brain farted this one and shoved the flop, which leads me to another mistake that a lot of you guys are probably doing. A lot of you guys are gonna recognize yourself in what I'm gonna explain right now, is that in 3-bet pots, there's like a general tendency to try and get rid of like thinking and just play your hand on the flop. Like, so many people look at their hand, they look at the flop, and they're like, okay, it's a 3-bet pot, I'm not folding that, I have too much equity, fuck that, I'm going all in. And they go all in, like, every time. They don't even consider their other options. Like, a good example, I don't know, you flop a small flush draw in position, and you're like a bit deeper than 100 big blinds, and a guy bets into you, and you're like, oh, flush draw, 3-bet pot, all in. And that's pretty much it. And guys tend to play their hands really too fast in 3-bet pots, and that's kind of where I want to get at, is that even though a pot is 3-bet, you still have some options left. It's not all in or fold situation like a lot of guys are playing, like at small stakes and mid stakes. Like I said, they just look at their relevant hand strength. Not relevant, I meant absolute hand strength, and they're like, okay, that's good enough for going all in a 3-bet pot, and they shove, and or they just like, okay, that's not good enough, and they fold. So yeah, like I said, you're really, really not in a shove or fold situation in 3-bet pots, and you want to avoid that kind of thinking as much as possible. And that's pretty much what happened in this end. Joe Gans went like, oh, overpair, fuck that, I'm going all in, I'm not folding that. When if he thought just a bit more, you would have seen that calling or even folding are way better options than going all in here, because you're just not getting paid by worse ever. I think if he does happen to have queens here, he's gonna fold him to your shove because you look so strong. Actually, Nit's gonna do that even, unless you have a like crazy retarded maniac image, which he doesn't seem to have. Shoving is just a big mistake every time. So yeah, he ended up shoving, and Mark Clark called with what we are going to assume is the best end. I didn't get the results for this end, but I assume that Mark Clark shipped the pot with aces, tens, or a quad city on the river. So yeah, that was a pretty big mistake, but don't worry, we all brain fart from time to time, as long as you learn from those mistakes and don't do it again. I mean, I've made worse mistakes myself. I do them regularly, but you just have to make sure you don't do that too often. So that was the second hand, and now to the third hand. Okay, third hand sent to me by Islanty, BFP member, The Walking Dead. Thanks, guy, for that end. Here, what we are going to be looking at is how stack sizes is going to affect how we are going to play a hand. Like how what would be a good play deep would not be such a good play like less deep, and the contrary as well. How being deep and or not deep is going to affect our play. So yeah, we have pocket king here on the big blind. We're going to be out of position for this, and we are like almost 450 big blind deep at 1-2 against CBH as bad cat. And our read on that guy is that what The Walking Dead told me is that he is a fish running at like 44-20 or something like that, and he is a bluff happy fish. He sent me a end story just earlier where that guy like 3-barrel bluff with an underpair on an ace high board, like dry ace high board, like the worst bluff ever that didn't make any sense. But he just seems like the type of guy who, if he decides to bluff all his stack, is gonna do it anyways. And just a maniac actually. So yeah, first we are gonna look at how Island T played the end in reality, what really happened, and then we're gonna look at how I would have played it, and then how stack size would have affected my play. So we raise here. Of course, we raise pretty big because it's a fish and we want to build a pot once again with kings, and we're like in a squeeze spot, etc., etc. What Identity ended up doing here is he c-bet, but he c-bet like 32. That's a pretty weird bet. I don't really like it because I think it's gonna induce, like, being that small in such a wet board is gonna induce a lot of bluffs, but you don't really want to be inducing bluffs that deep, I think, on such a board, because you're really not happy putting all your stack in on that flop with just kings on such a wet board where you could have a set, 2 pairs, flop straight, etc., etc. So yeah, I think I really don't like the bet actually, because like I said, it's gonna induce bluffs, but you don't really want to go broke, so it's gonna make him bluff you very often. Against that villain, I think that's like probably the worst option to make an inducing bet. So yeah, he bets 32. He gets min raised, which could mean a lot of things. Could mean draw. It could mean the nuts. Could mean like bottom pair turned into a bluff or whatever. It could just means that CBH's bad cat decided that he was gonna bluff that hand because the bet is just so suspicious. But we can't fold anyway here on the flop because we have a gutter if we're not good, and kings might be good outs as well. And we're getting such a good price to see the turn that I think the only real good play here is to call, and we don't want to go broke, obviously. So he did that, right? He called flop, turn his brick, 6 of hearts, he checks, and villain bets the pot. Here, personally, it's really a tricky spot. Personally, I don't think I would have folded, just because of our flop bet that makes it a lot more likely for a villain to be bluffing here, especially with his bluffing history and probably his high bluffing frequency in general. But I'm still not really happy to put 250 big blinds on that end. But I just can't fold, just because even if you're behind, you probably have some decent equity with like 4 or 6 outs, or at least 3 outs always. So like I would be more likely to fold aces here than kings, because kings give you more equity, and I will definitely not fold queens, even though like it's kind of counterintuitive because aces are better than queens, but here you just have so much more equity with queens that I think folding kings here with our flop bet is kind of a small mistake. But he ended up folding, probably because, like I said, he didn't want to lose that many big blinds in such a spot. So that's what happened. Now we are gonna look at how I would have played it personally. Okay, so yeah, that is gonna be the way Jiggy would have played that hand, given the stack sizes. So pre-flop goes the same. We get called the same way, and small blind folds. And flop comes Jack 9-10. Here, against such a villain, I mean, this guy is gonna change a bit our play here, because we know that he's likely to be bluffing all streets. But our flop play here, I think personally, my flop play that deep because the stack size is what is going to influence the most. My first decision in the hand here is going to be almost the same against every guy. Not not every guy, but against like maybe 80% of villains here. I think what I'm gonna do here is I am gonna check the flop, just because if you bet and get raised, you are in the worst spot ever. First of all, second of all, you pretty much never ever get 3 streets of value out of a worse hand here. Third of all, like out of a worse made hand like Ace Jack's not gonna call 3 streets on that board. There's like no way in the world. Another thing, if you bet and get raised, you might get bluffed out of the best end if he has like big draw, like Ace Queen Spades or something like that. You can't really go all in, but he's gonna make life a lot difficult. No matter what who villain is here, he's gonna make life difficult if you bet and get raised, that's for sure. So yeah, what I'm gonna do is probably just cut the numbers of streets remaining in that hand, because I don't want all my stack to go in. I will try to check the flop for deception and pot control, and I don't really mind seeing other cards falling because I have kings, because I don't care if a queen falls. That's good for me actually. If a king falls, that's not the best card, but we would have still we would be good some amount of time and have a big redraw rest of the time. Like the only card I don't want to see really is either a spade or an 8 or maybe a 7. These are the bad cards. So that leaves a lot of like quote unquote good turn cards for us. So we really don't mind if the flop goes check check. If we had like aces here and no redraw, I think I would be a bit more likely to bet, just not to get a free card, to like bet fold the end, not to give away a free card, and to protect my end and value and etc etc. But here with some redraws, I'm most likely to check call, and I actually like it if it goes check check, because if it goes check check and a brick falls, I can start value betting my hand pretty strong and be pretty confident about that. So yeah, that deep here, I'm gonna check most of the time that flop. And now what's gonna affect my decisions is the villain here. We know that, and that's true. Like a couple of hands ago, maybe I don't know, maybe not a couple of hands ago, maybe an hour ago or whatever. But we saw that guy like 3-barrel bluff, like a lot of money in with an under pair, with like the worst bluff ever, because we kind of checked and induced that. So here, when we check against that guy, I think it's very likely that he starts trying to bluff us with any piece of the board, any even gutter, any 8, even any queen. He's gonna start barreling a lot. So I think we have, when we check, to be prepared to call down. But checking here first makes it a lot likely that the flop goes check check, and then it's a lot easier for us to play our end. And when it does happen to like start barreling, it is much more likely for him to be bluffing than if we bet. So we are happier to start calling down than if we had bet the flop, because he's gonna be bluffing more often, and we have a redraw anyway if we're not good. So yeah, we check all the flop. The rest is like I invented the rest of the end, because that's not what happened. I didn't check all, but yeah, I would check the turn again. I assume that he would bet again, and I would call again, obviously, for obvious reasons, obviously. So I call, and the river is like the perfect break in the deck. And given how we played that hand, and given who villain is, I think we have to check all the river because like all draws missed and he's barreling draw. He's gonna have his beat some percentage of the time, some amount of the time, but he's gonna have a bluff often enough for our call down to be profitable, that's for sure. So we call and he river the set of 2 and we like go berserk and throw chairs around and break stuff and things like that. So, which is obviously very normal, as he would have probably fired a river anyway if he didn't, even if it didn't hit his set of 2s. But I wanted to show you guys that checking here, given stack sizes, is gonna make it so much more easier to play than if you bet. Because if you bet and get raised, his range is going to be so much stronger, and it's going to be less profitable to just go rogue. It's going to be a lot tougher, and checking is going to induce, and checking is going to like add deception to your hand for first streets, etc., etc. So that is how, given the stack sizes, I would have played that hand. Now we're going to look at if we were only like 100 big blind deep, what I would have done, which is really not what the same thing. Now, same hand, but we are only 100 big blinds deep. It's going to obviously be like 100 times easier to play. I'm just going to show you that my play is going to be different. Obviously, I mean that's not that hand is not like the most sophisticated one, but I just wanted to show you the guys that stack sizes are gonna affect what is the good play and what is not the good play. So yeah, here with these stack sizes, there's already like 17 in the pot. I think checking with 169 bucks left behind is like a big mistake against that villain, even though he's likely to take a stab at the pot. If we do check, I think by checking we allow him to pot control way too many holdings, stuff like ace 10 that you would probably not fold if we end up betting, stuff like I don't know, 9-8 or ace 9 even, that kind of villain could go broke with ace 9, or 10 king or king jack even. You would probably actually bet king jack if we check to him. But yeah, any middle pair or any like naked queen, queen 8 or ace queen or stuff like that, that could decide to or any spades draw that could decide to take his free card if we check to him, is not going to go broke when we bet, and our equity is like so good against his range, and he's not folding many things. Actually, that's the difference here. We don't want him to check back like something like king jack, because we have so much value against king jack. But in the example when we were much deeper, we kind of want him to check back king jack, because we wouldn't have gotten 3 streets of value against king jack on that board anyways. And by checking the flop and making him check back the flop, we kind of make our equity so much better from the turn on. When the brick falls off, our equity is so much better against like any draw or like queen jack or stuff like that, that now we can value bet a lot easier and a lot more, and be a lot more comfortable doing it. But yeah, like here example, we're 100 big blind deep, like I said, our end is just too good, way too much equity. We don't want him to check back when we are just 100 big blind deep, so we just bet, and he shoves, and we call. And he has like ace queen that he decided to shove, and he gets there on the river. Like I'm not gonna say bad words. Like it, funny guy. And the worst of all is that we waste a set in like our big bank of sets that could be useful later if we needed to two-author someone. Now we wasted a two-author, but that's another topic completely. So yeah, I just wanted to illustrate, guys, that betting here is way better than checking when we are 100 big blinds deep, and that checking is way better than betting at like 250 big blinds deep. That is one example, and there are a whole lot of hands I could have taken to illustrate that point, but I think that one made my point clear pretty easily, and hope you guys understood that stack sizes are gonna influence what is the best play. So last in, now we are gonna look at board texture. So yeah, last in, like I said, we're gonna be looking at board texture. This in has been sent to me by Svein Trandem, something like that. Hope I'm telling that right. AKA Star Trek on BFP, and he wanted me to change his screen name, so I went ahead and changed that to Star Trek. I hope he doesn't hate me for that, because I find that hilarious. Anyway, we have aces, and we're gonna look at how, like I said, board texture is gonna affect our play in the 3-bet pot. So we have aces, so we raise aces. He makes a 3x, which is super cool, and Serial Killer, which is another cool screen name, goes ahead and 3-bets us from the big blind. Of course, our buttons disappear, but we're gonna assume that call is somewhere here. Whee! And we call in position. We could have, like he could have in that end, 4-bet as well as calling. Both are good, but that's not the point of this, and we're gonna look at post flop. So yeah, let's say he ended up calling. We are 100 big blinds deep. Flop comes 10-8-4 with a flush draw, which is a pretty dry flop. And by dry, I obviously mean very wet, a wet flop. And Serial Killer checks to us. Reads on the players in that hand. Svein is telling me that Serial Killer is apparently a pretty good regular, running something like 27-20, pretty aggressive, but who has shown like a tendency to take a lot of pot control lines with stuff like middle pair or top pair no kicker or hands like that. And here Hero, aka Star Trek, has a tag image, something like 2117, and has not much history, never really gotten out of line against Villain, so Villain's not gonna expect a big bluff here. So I think when Villain checks here, our only option is pretty much to bet and hope he has something. Hope he is intending to like check raise draw, or top pair and wants to check call or whatever, because anyway, we want to get value and we pretty much have the nuts here, so we're gonna bet. So he ends up betting 30, which I think is pretty fine, perfectly fine. I would probably bet a bit smaller, just because I would bet smaller with my air, because it gives me a better price when I have hair here to bluff. I'm just in 3-bet pots, I just tend to make my bets a bit smaller than normally. I think it's kind of, like I said, for the purpose of protecting your whole range of bluffing here. I think you have to make the bet a bit smaller than 3/4. If you were always valuing here, 3/4 would be perfectly fine, but since you will be bluffing a lot in this spot, I would make it a bit smaller with like all of my hands. But he ended up making 30, which is, like I said, perfectly fine. So he bets 30, and the big blind calls. Now we're going to look at how Star Trek here played the end in reality. He's telling me in his email with his end that here, when Villain check calls the flop, he's putting him a lot on middle pair type hand, like, I don't know, Ace 8, Jack 10, maybe Pocket 9, stuff like that. and I completely agree with him. I think if he has a big draw, he's going to check raise more often, check call on that flop especially. If he has an overpair, he's going to bet more often than check call. So yeah, it is more likely, and almost single possible holding here is something like a mill end. And he told me, I don't think I'm getting 2 streets of value out of a mill, like medium pair, mill string type end. So what he decided to do is to check back the turn and try to get his value on the river, because he would look much more weaker, which is not a bad idea, but I think is a small mistake on that exact board, and we are gonna look at why in a second. So yeah, he check backs the turn, river villain checks again, and we of course want to be value betting here. We kind of look pretty weak, but at the same time, the queen kind of nails our range. But I mean, he could still make some kind of hero call, and we bet pretty big here, wanting hero to like think we have a polarized range of air or something big like Jack 9 that just hit, and hero calls us with his most possible holding, which is medium strength end, and that's how the actual played out. The actual hand played out. Villain ended up calling the river with Jack 10 for flop top pair, river medium pair, and we win a pretty nice spot. That's how our hero here played the end, but that's not how I would have played it. We're gonna look now at how personally I would have played it, considering the board texture. Now same hand, the way I would have played it. Same thing pre-flop. Fold, fold. We get raised and we decide to slow play. Yeah, call. And flop comes the same. And villain checks. And I told earlier that I would make the bet a bit smaller, but let's say I just made it the same, because that's really turn play here that I think is important. So I bet 30. Villain check call, so we put him rightly on like a middle pair type end. He has made in like almost here, he never has nothing. So we're looking at the turn at our different options. We could, like Svein did here, check back that turn, hoping to get value on the river, being afraid that we're not getting 2 streets of value out of a weak made end here. That's not a bad way to see the situation, but that's not the optimal way, I think. The board here is so wet and so draw heavy that I think we have here to use that board to make our opponent believe that we have a draw and make him like quote unquote hero call with his medium strength holding. But that's not that much of a hero call, considering the texture of the board and the fact that we are gonna have a draw so often on that flop, like any flush draw, Jack Queen suited, Jack 9 suited, 7-9 suited, sometimes gonna call pre-flop as well. We can represent that very well. So what personally I would have done on that flop, and that is not something I would have done if the flop was drier or if that same flop would have come rainbow, but now on that flop, I think once I know that my opponent most likely has a medium strength hand, medium made strength hand, we have, like I said, to use board texture to make our opponent look at his hand, look at the board, the action, tell himself, alright, there are just way too many draws in my opponent's range here. But it's too big, my equity is too good. I'm all in with like his pocket 9s or Jack 10, which are like his most probable holding. The other point for betting the turn here is that on such a board, first, well, you don't want your opponent to suck out on you on the river. Let's say the river is a jack. There's no way there's like with the size of the pot, there's no way you can get away from your aces. But if he starts putting some action, he might have hit like 2 pairs or stuff like that, but you won't know it. But you have to get all in anyway, otherwise you miss too much value. So he's gonna suck out on you sometimes, and he's gonna value bet you to that when he does that. And other times, the river is just completely gonna kill your action. Let's say the river is like king of diamonds or queen of diamond, or like any king, any ace, is most likely to kill your action against medium hand here. So the best way to look like a draw here, in my opinion, is either without further historic between villains, with like the reads we have and our own image, is either to overshove or bet the pot, or like slight overbet or something like that, making it look like we want to maximize our fold equity while committing ourselves to the pot with our big draw. So yeah, like I said, in Villain's mind here, a big bet is most likely gonna be a draw, and his equity is gonna be just, he's not even making a mistake by going all in. He has to, because we just have too many draws in our range. So that's what we end up doing. I decided to bet the pot instead of shoving, because I think against 2 players that know each other pretty well, sometimes shoving might be a bit more suspicious, like it's kind of trying too hard to look like a draw that it can't really be one, so he might decide to hero fold his hand. But betting the pot here is, in my mind, a pretty sure bet to look like a draw, and to make him raise you all in, and you snap, and you tarp the fish, pow, and you ship. So that's the way I would have played the hand, given board texture, given that you can use what's there to make your opponent, to mislead your opponent, to make him believe that you have something else that what you really have, and that is really important. And the board is something you have to use to your own advantage, to, like I said, mislead your opponent and add deception to your game. Finally, guys, I'm just gonna illustrate to you the same hand, but with another board texture, how the same bet is no longer good. It's just no longer good. So yeah, same action, bet, raise, 3-bet, etc. Flop cup's the same, but there's no flush draw on the flop. You still go ahead and bet the flop, hoping that he has anything that's gonna pay you. You could check back as well a bit more. When there's no flush draw, you could make some arguments for checking back the flop, but let's say you decide to bet it. On that flop, I would definitely bet smaller than 30 most of the time. But anyway, let's say you decided to bet it 30. Now the turn card brings an offsuit deuce. Now the board is just really dry. No flush draw at all. It's rainbow. I think now that our hero's original theory applies a lot more in that spot than it did on the flush draw board. Like, we know he has, like, Villain has a medium straight hand, but if we do bet here, Villain is way much more likely to fold his hand, because he's gonna look at our range, and we know he's like at least a minimum, he has a minimum of skills in hand reading, and he's gonna look at our range and he's gonna tell himself they're just not enough draws in Star Trek range here to go broke with like my middle pair. My equity just sucks. I don't think he's bluffing with hair here. He's probably gonna fold. So yes, on that board, personally, that's what I would have done. I would have checked back the turn, trying to get some more value on the river, or to induce whatever, and bet the river, trying to get a hero call from Jack 10. So I hope you guys understand really the difference and the importance of of adjusting your play to what you can actually represent, what you want to be representing, and how you can use the board and the cards that are there in the action to, like I said earlier, mislead your opponents into what you really have. And now, how more importantly, some boards are gonna give you a lot more options than you think that you have. So that's it for the lesson. Now that we looked at all these concepts and variables, I hope that you guys will be able to put them all together and take them all into consideration, and even more, and think the right way when you are playing 3-bet pots, so that you stop making mistakes and you start inducing mistakes and making the right move at the right time. That's pretty much it. So this was Jiggy on 3-bet pots. Hope you enjoyed it, guys, and be prudent on the road.